Nobody told the Drevhari that silence was a weapon. They learned it themselves, the same way they learned everything, by watching us fail. Rael Dowan was eating cold rice from a sealed pack when the casualty numbers came through. He did not put the rice down. He kept eating, slowly, one small spoonful at a time, while the numbers climbed across the screen bolted to the wall of his quarters. 3,000 warships. That was the number that went in. He counted the ones that came out. He did it twice, because the first time he thought he had made an error. He hadn't. 11. The Battle of Kareth Vale had lasted 4 hours and 22 minutes. He knew this because the timestamp on the first distress signal and the timestamp on the last confirmed contact were both saved in the same file, and the math was simple. 4 hours, 22 minutes, 3,000 warships, most of the coalition's trained pilots, gunners, and officers gone. He set the rice pack down after a while, not because he had lost his appetite, because he had finished it. The Ardent Sorrow was a 31-year-old Meridian-class heavy cruiser, and it smelled like one. Recycled air with a faint bite of burned wiring behind the portside ventilation panels that the engineering crew had been chasing for 6 months without finding. Rael had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the sound of your own heartbeat. The ship was old, undermanned, running at 60% rated capacity, and assigned to perimeter patrol of a corridor that nobody important wanted to be near. That was not an accident. 6 weeks before Kareth Vale, Rael had stood before the High Council and told them, in plain language with a full data presentation, that the offensive was going to fail. He had walked them through the Drevhari's engagement history, every recorded battle, every adaptation, every weapon they had absorbed and turned around within hours. He used the word catastrophic 4 times in 30 minutes. The head of the War Committee, Admiral Brecht Oyen, had listened with his hands flat on the table and his face entirely still, and then thanked Rael for his analysis and told him that morale required decisive action. 3 weeks later, Rael received his new assignment, Perimeter Patrol, Sector 7, Minimum Crew. He had not argued. He had packed his books, real ones, paper, a habit his crew found eccentric and he found necessary, and boarded the Ardent Sorrow and introduced himself to his new people. There were 214 of them. He learned their names inside a week, not because it was required, but because he believed a commander who did not know his crew's names had already made a fundamental mistake about what commanding meant. His first officer was Lieutenant Sierra Vane, 34, precise in everything she did, and she kept her fear locked behind a professionalism so thorough that most people had never seen it. Rael had. Once, when a navigation drill went wrong and they nearly clipped an unmapped debris field at partial speed, for about 4 seconds before she corrected the situation and issued calm instructions, her hands had been shaking. He had not mentioned it. But he had noted it, and what he noted was not weakness. It was honesty. Her body was honest even when her face was not, and he considered that a strength. Their intelligence officer was a man named Das Carroll, 41, thin, unhurried in the way people who spend most of their time inside their own heads tend to be. He carried a small notebook everywhere, actual paper, like Rael's books, and wrote in it constantly. Nobody was entirely sure what he wrote. He had been assigned to the Ardent Sorrow after filing a 15-page analysis of Drevhari behavioral patterns that High Command had classified, shelved, and then forgotten. He had asked for a transfer to active research. He received a transfer to Sector 7. The casualty report finished updating. 267,412 personnel confirmed lost. Rael sat with that number for a while. Then he pulled up his terminal and typed a request to the ship's archive system. He did not request tactical files or weapon inventories. He requested every piece of behavioral data the Coalition had ever collected on the Drevhari, not what they did in battle, what they did before it, after it, between engagements, what they ignored, what they paused for. What, in over 2 centuries of near-constant warfare, had ever made them hesitate? Sierra appeared in his doorway 20 minutes later. She had the look she wore when she had already run through a situation 3 times and arrived at something she did not like. "The council is convening," she said. "Emergency session. We're being patched in as observers." "I know." He did not look up. "Tell Das I want him in the archive room in an hour." She was quiet. "You're not going to watch the session." "I'll read the summary." He looked at her. "The council is going to do what the council is going to do. I'm more interested in what we're going to do." Something moved behind her eyes, not quite fear, not quite hope. Something between them, in the space where people go when they understand that things have changed and there is no going back to before. "All right," she said, and she left. Rail turned back to the screen. He made himself hold the number, all of it. Then he started reading. The archive room had no windows. It was a narrow space behind the ship's primary data core, with 2 terminals, poor lighting, and a folding table that nobody had ever bothered to replace after the hinge broke. Das Carroll sat cross-legged on the floor with his notebook open, and 400 years of war spread across the screen in front of him. He had been waiting for someone to ask him about this for 15 years. "Start with the survivors," Rail said, pulling a chair to the terminal beside him. Sierra leaned against the wall. She had brought her own chair and then decided not to use it. Some people think better on their feet, and she was one of them. Das flipped to a section near the back of his notebook. "There are 3 confirmed cases of coalition vessels surviving direct Drevhari engagement, not retreating, surviving, remaining in contact range." "I've read the official reports," Rail said. "Tell me what the official reports missed." Das looked at him. "The first case, the Ulmer's Rest, 23 years ago. Captain Bryn Salava ordered his crew to eject the reactor core and drift. No power, no signal. The Drevhari scanned them for 9 minutes and then moved on." "They thought the ship was dead," Sierra said. "That's what the report concluded," Das said, "but I don't think that's right. The Drevhari had already scanned the Ulmer's Rest twice earlier in the engagement and classified it as a functioning vessel. A dead reactor doesn't change a ship's shape. They knew it was there." He turned a page. "I think they stopped because they had never seen a crew do that before, eject their own reactor in the middle of a battle. It made no tactical sense. It was, on paper, a suicidal act. And the Drevhari had no category for it." The room was quiet. "Second case," Das continued. "The Paralin. Captain Davamur broadcasts a standard peace signal, which the Drevhari have ignored every previous time anyone has ever tried it. Then, during the 12-second transmission window, she rams a Drevhari processing node at full speed. The collision destroys the node and cripples the Paralin. The remaining Drevhari vessels do not pursue. They withdraw and do not return to that sector for 11 months. "The report called that a suicide run," Sierra said. "The report called it luck," Das looked up. "But Davamur survived. She was pulled out of the wreck 4 days later by a search team. In her debrief, she said she didn't plan the ram. She said the peace signal felt dishonest and she just stopped being able to do it. She got angry. She turned the ship." He closed the notebook. "The Drevhari withdrew not because of the collision. The processing node was a minor loss for them. They withdrew because a vessel that was broadcasting peace turned and rammed them without any transition. No escalation, no tactical signal, just a decision made in a moment by a person who felt something." Rail had been still for a while. "And the third?" "Engineer named Pav Olin. His captain was dead. The ship was damaged. He vented atmosphere from the forward hull, a catastrophic error, not a tactic. The Drevhari vessel in pursuit pulled back for 17 minutes. When they re-engaged, Olin was already in a rescue shuttle and the Edris had broken apart." Das looked between them. 17 minutes. That is the longest confirmed Drevhari hesitation in recorded history, and it happened because a man made a mistake under pressure. Sierra straightened from the wall. "You're saying they hesitate when they encounter behavior they haven't seen." "More than that." Das pulled the notebook back open. "They can't adapt to it. They are the most perfect learning system anyone has ever encountered. Give them a weapon, they'll counter it within hours. Give them a formation, they'll unravel at the next engagement, but they learn by pattern. They need a thing to have a shape before they can respond to it. He tapped the notebook. What they have no answer for is genuine unpredictability. Not performed unpredictability, a feint is still a pattern. Real unpredictability. The kind that comes from a person acting on actual emotion, actual instinct. Something that even the person doing it did not plan. Rail stood up. He walked to the far wall and stood there with his arms crossed, looking at nothing in particular. Sira watched him. Das watched him. Nobody spoke. Finally Rail said, "If we go in with a plan, they'll read the plan." "Yes," Das said. "So the only way to do something they can't counter is to go in without one." Not without one exactly, Das thought for a moment. With a philosophy instead of a plan. A way of being rather than a set of instructions. Instructions can be modeled. A person genuinely responding to a moment in real time from real feeling cannot. Rail nodded slowly. It was the kind of nod that meant he had already moved 3 steps past the thing he was nodding at. "Write all of this up," he said. "Everything, the 3 cases, your analysis, all of it. I want it documented and I want your name on it." Das looked slightly surprised. "Why?" "Because if we're right," Rail said, "someone should get the credit, and if we're wrong, at least someone will know we tried to think clearly." He moved toward the door. "I have to make a call to the council." Sira caught his eye as he passed her. "And if they say no?" He stopped but did not turn around. "They will say no," he said. "That's not the question." He left, the door slid shut behind him. Das looked at Sira. Sira looked at the door. Then she sat down, finally, in the chair she had brought. The transmission was patchy, the way all long-range council feeds were, a half-second lag that made every exchange feel like talking to ghosts. Rail watched Admiral Brecht Oyen's face on the screen and noticed what the battle had done to him. The man had been solid 2 months ago, in the way that people who have spent 40 years inside a military institution become solid, worn down to something dense and reliable. Now he looked like a house whose load-bearing walls had shifted. The shape was still there. The certainty was not. 12 members of the High Council sat behind Oyen. Most of them had the same look. One of them was crying quietly and had not bothered to wipe her face. Oyen laid out the plan without preamble. Collapse the 3 remaining transit corridors connecting the outer systems to the Coalition core. Seal them. Buy time. The Drevhari advance had a direction, and this would force them to find a new one which would take months. Maybe 8, maybe 12. Long enough, perhaps, to try something else. The council member on Oyen's right stated the figure flatly. "The way you say things you have already made peace with. 900 million people in the outer systems would be cut off. Supply lines severed. Communication reduced to tight beam relay, slow and unreliable. They would not starve, not immediately, but they would be alone in a way that no civilian population had been alone since the early years of the war." Rail waited until there was a pause. Then he said, "I have a different proposal." Oyen looked at him the way a tired man looks at something he expected. "Commander Dowan." "Admiral." Rail had his tablet in front of him. He walked them through it, Das's analysis, the 3 survivor cases, the behavioral pattern. He spoke for 11 minutes without interruption. He watched their faces. Most of them were listening. Some of them were believing him, which surprised him a little. He had expected more resistance. When he finished, Oyen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You are describing sending a single undermanned vessel into direct engagement with an enemy that destroyed 3,000 ships this morning, with no plan, in the hope that your crew's genuine emotional responses will cause the enemy to hesitate long enough for what, exactly? A negotiation." "I don't know what comes after the hesitation," Rail said. "That's the point. If I knew, it wouldn't work." Oyen looked down at his hands. The council member who had been crying had stopped. The room was very quiet. "Rail," Oyen almost never used his first name, "I have known you for 22 years. I know that you are not reckless. I know that you are not doing this out of grief or anger. I know you genuinely believe this." He looked up. "And I am telling you, as someone who also cannot afford to be wrong, I cannot authorize this. I cannot send 200 people to their deaths on a theory, however well-reasoned. I cannot let a single vessel be the last thing standing between the Drevhari and everything we have left." He paused. "I am sorry." The corridors were sealed 4 minutes after the session ended. Rail stood on the bridge for a long time after the transmission closed. Sira stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. The Ardent Sorrow was positioned just inside the mouth of the Vethara corridor, the central transit route, the one the Drevhari advance would reach first based on current trajectory. On the other side of that corridor was the Coalition's core, 18 populated systems, 6 billion people, everything that remained. And behind Rail's ship, the corridor gates were now locked shut. He opened the ship-wide channel. His voice was calm, but not forced calm, the real kind. The kind that comes from having made a decision and finished arguing with yourself about it. "This is Commander Dowan. You all know what happened at Kareth Vale. You know what the Council just decided. We are currently positioned at the entrance to the Vethara corridor, and the Drevhari advance will reach this point within 18 hours. He paused, not for effect, because he wanted to say the next part exactly right. "I have a theory about how to stop them. It is not a certain theory. It is not a safe theory. I will not insult you by calling it anything other than what it is, a chance and not a large one." Another pause. "Anyone who wants to leave can take one of the 2 shuttles to Kasara Station right now. The lock releases in 4 minutes. I will file no report on who leaves. There will be no record. This is a volunteer mission, not an order, and I mean that plainly." He closed the channel. Sira was looking at him. "Are you leaving?" he asked. "No," she said. "Neither is Das," he said. He had already known. He wanted to say it out loud because it seemed important. The 4 minutes passed. Rail watched the shuttle bay indicator on the secondary display. One shuttle launched at 2 minutes, then the second at 3 minutes and 40 seconds. He did not check the crew manifest to see who had gone. That was not his right. When the lock sealed again, he had the Ardent Sorrow move forward. Slow, deliberate. Das Carroll appeared on the bridge and stood near the rear wall, his notebook in his hand, open to a blank page, ready to write, as if whatever was about to happen was a thing worth recording. Rail looked at him once. Das gave him a small nod. 183 people, 1 old ship, 1 direction. Forward, 11 Drevhari vessels. Each one wider than the Ardent Sorrow was long, arranged in a loose formation at the far end of the Vethara corridor like a door someone had built out of things that could kill you. They had been holding position for 6 hours by the time Rail's ship came into sensor range. Not advancing. Waiting. The Drevhari always waited after a major engagement, processing the data, incorporating the new material, sharpening themselves against what they had just learned. Rail had gathered the senior crew in the bridge, not for a briefing. He had already told them everything he knew. He gathered them because he wanted to say one thing to their faces, not over a channel. "There is no battle plan," he said. "I mean that exactly. No maneuver patterns, no weapons rotations, no coordinated responses. What we are going to do is fly into that formation and be people, your actual selves, not soldiers following a doctrine, people making real decisions in the moment from what you actually feel." He looked around the room. "If you would turn the ship left and you feel something that makes you want to turn right, turn right. If you would hold fire and your gut says fire, fire. I am not commanding this engagement. You are, every one of you." He paused. "They can model doctrine. They cannot model a person who doesn't know what they're going to do next. So don't know, just be here." The weapons officer, a compact woman named Faye Brune, said, "What if we blow each other up doing random things?" "Then we blow each other up," Rail said. "But I don't think we will. I think you'll feel each other. The same way you always do when things go wrong fast and nobody has time to follow the handbook." He looked at her. "Trust that." He moved to Sierra's station. "One more thing. I want you to broadcast on the open hailing frequency." She looked up at him. "Not a message," he said. "Music, something that matters to you, not something tactical, not something chosen for effect, something real." She stared at him for 3 seconds. "You're serious?" "The whole point is that I am." She turned back to her console. He did not watch what she selected. He did not want to know in advance. The ardent sorrow entered the formation's engagement range at half speed, not charging, not retreating, just moving the way a person moves when they are not sure what they are about to do. The first thing that happened was the music. It filled the bridge, a slow, instrumental piece, something built around a single repeating melody that kept resolving and then opening back up again before it could finish. It was the kind of music that sounded like a feeling rather than a performance. Rael did not recognize it. He heard Sierra's breathing change beside him just slightly. The Drevhari formation did not fire. 4 minutes passed. Then the ardent sorrow turned, not on command, but because the helmsman, a young man named Carol Wass, felt the weight of the formation pressing toward the port side and steered away from it instinctively, the way you lean when something large moves near you. The ship curved in a way no evasive doctrine recommended. Faye fired the forward rail guns at a 40-degree offset from any Drevhari vessel, not a miss, but not aimed either, just a release like exhaling. The burst lit up the corridor and reflected back strange off the Drevhari hulls. The formation adjusted, hesitated. One vessel pulled back 30 kilometers. Then the ardent sorrow took a hit, a glancing Drevhari energy pulse, low intensity like a warning or a question. The ship shuddered. A corridor section in the engineering deck buckled. The damage report came through to Rael's screen. 3 personnel in that section. He read the names. He was still reading them when Das Carroll's name appeared at the bottom of the list. He sat with that for a moment. The music kept playing. Das had been in the wrong corridor. He had probably been walking toward the bridge, notebook in hand, wanting to observe. The hull breach had been fast. He would not have known much about it. Rael thought about the notebook. He thought about the blank page Das had been ready to write on. He thought about Das's sister, somewhere in the outer colonies, now sealed off behind the closed corridor gates, waiting. He did not announce it to the bridge. Not yet. But his hands on the console were not the hands of a commander calculating. They were the hands of a man who had just lost someone, and he did not try to make them into anything else. A second Drevhari vessel pulled back from the formation. Faye fired again, this time because she heard the music shift and it made her think of her home city on Marath, which had been evacuated 2 years ago and which she had not let herself think about since. The shot went wide and hit nothing. The point was that she fired because she was there, fully present, and what moved her was real. The Drevhari hesitated. The whole formation held. 8 minutes had passed since the first shot. In 2 centuries of war, the longest recorded hesitation before this moment had been 17 minutes. They were at 8. Rael kept his hands where they were. He felt the shape of what Das had figured out, not as a theory anymore, but as a thing happening around him. The ship was full of people making imperfect, human, unrepeatable decisions, and there was no pattern for a perfect learning machine to find. Because a pattern requires consistency, and what was happening here was anything but. The music reached its final resolution and looped back to the beginning. The formation did not advance. 17 minutes came and went. The formation still had not moved. Sierra was tracking the Drevhari vessels on the secondary display, watching the small adjustments they made, minor orientation shifts, energy fluctuations, the kind of micro-movements that in every previous engagement had preceded an attack. Here they preceded nothing. The enemy was recalculating. Whatever they were doing internally, it was taking longer than anything in the historical record. Rael had a decision to make. He could hold position, let the standoff continue. Maybe it would last another hour, maybe another day, but he knew the way you know things when you have spent enough time studying an enemy that eventually they would find a classification for what they were seeing and they would act on it. The Drevhari did not stop. They adapted and then they moved. He needed to give them something they could not adapt to, something that had no shape at all. He pulled up the broadband hailing frequency on his console. All channels, every wavelength the ardent sorrow could transmit on simultaneously. The communications officer, a young man named Ren, looked at him with a question on his face. "Leave it open," Rael said. "Don't close it until I tell you." He thought about what Das had said in the archive room about the difference between a tactic and a truth. He thought about what he had felt when Das's name appeared on the damage report. He thought about the notebook, the blank page. And then he started talking. Not at the Drevhari. He talked the way you talk when you need to say something out loud because keeping it inside has become too heavy. He told them about Das Carroll, not what Das did or what rank he held or what his function on the ship was. He told them that Das had been writing in a notebook for 15 years, keeping ideas that nobody in high command wanted to hear, because he believed that if you looked carefully enough at anything, even war, you could find the shape of something true underneath it. He told them that Das had a sister named Wen who lived in the outer colonies, and who was now sealed behind a corridor that the coalition had locked to save the people on the other side, and that Das had not known this when he walked down that corridor this morning. He had just been walking somewhere. He told them about the music Sira had played, that she hadn't chosen it strategically, that it was something her mother had played when Sira was a child, and that she had not thought about her mother in years because thinking about her was too much to carry on a ship like this. And she had played it anyway because Rael had asked her to do something real, and this was the most real thing she had. He talked for 9 minutes without planning what came next, because Das had taught him, in every analysis the man had filed and nobody read, that specific things are the only things that cannot be absorbed, that the particular resists digestion. When he stopped, the channel stayed open. The ship was very quiet. Then one of the Drevhari vessels transmitted back. Ren spun in his chair. "Commander, incoming signal. Broadband matching our frequency." "Play it." The bridge filled with a sound that was not language and not music. It was something between them, a frequency pattern with internal structure, rhythmic but irregular, layered. Rael listened to it and felt nothing except that it was clearly intentional. Something had made this. Something had chosen to send it rather than not. Sira was already at the signal analysis station. She pulled the pattern up on her screen and mapped it against the music she had played. For a moment she just stared at it. Then she said, quietly, "They changed it." "What?" "The music I broadcast. They've taken its structure and altered it, not copied it, made something new from it." She turned around. "Rael, they built something." The room held that. Nobody spoke. The Drevhari had spent 200 years consuming everything anyone threw at them. Every weapon, every formation, every tactic. They had absorbed it all and become better because of it. And in all that time, in every engagement in the record, they had never once created anything. They adapted, they optimized, they destroyed. And now one of them had taken a piece of music from a dead woman's memory and made something new out of it. That was not the behavior of an enemy. That was not even the behavior of a predator. Rael did not have a word for what it was. He stood at his console and felt the floor of the situation shift under him. The way the floor shifts when you realize the problem you have been solving is not the problem that actually exists. The formation held. The signal played twice more and then went silent. "What do we do?" Carroll asked from the helm. He was 26 years old and he had been scared for 3 hours and was doing his job anyway, which Rael noted and did not say aloud. "We wait," Rael said. "For what?" Rael looked at the formation on the screen. 11 vessels, still, quiet, doing something inside themselves that he could not see. To find out if what just happened means what I think it means, he said. The music had stopped, but the silence was different now. It had a texture that the silence before it had not had. Something had been introduced into the space between them that was not there an hour ago, and everyone on that bridge could feel it, even if none of them had the words for it. Rael picked up his console again and started writing a message to Admiral Brecht Oyen. 9 hours after the signal, the Drevhari formation still had not moved. Brecht Oyen had been watching the sensor feed for 6 of those hours from a command post behind the sealed corridor. He did not speak much during that time. The officers around him offered interpretations, and he listened to them and did not respond, which was unusual for him. Oyen had always been a man who made decisions quickly, who believed that certainty was something you built through action rather than something you waited for. 6 hours of watching the impossible hold still had done something to that belief. When Rael's message came through, Oyen read it 3 times. Then he opened the channel himself. "Tell me what you did," he said, when Rael appeared on the screen. He said it without preamble and without the careful tone of a superior speaking to a subordinate. He sounded like a man asking a genuine question. "I told them the truth," Rael said, "about Das, about the music, about specific things that were real." He paused. "I stopped trying to win and I started trying to be honest, and it turned out those were different operations." Oyen looked at him for a long time, and the signal they sent back. "Sira thinks they responded to the music, not mimicked it, built from it, created something new." Rael leaned forward slightly. "Brecht, they have spent 200 years consuming everything we handed them, every weapon, every doctrine, every formation. They got better because we kept giving them things to get better from, and in all of that they never once made anything that wasn't a counter." He let that settle. "Until now, one of them made something, and I don't think that's a small thing." Oyen was quiet. "Open the corridor," Rael said. "Send vessels in cold weapons down. Let them see that we can also do something we have never done before." The corridor opened 40 minutes later. 6 coalition ships moved through with their weapon systems offline, which went against every piece of military protocol that existed, and which Oyen had authorized personally, over the objections of 2 senior officers who did not understand what was happening and were therefore right to object. He told them that and asked them to trust him, which was all he could do. The Drevhari did not fire. Over the following hours, Sira worked with Ren and 2 other Signals crew members to build something that was not a translator and not a communicator but something between them, a way of mapping patterns against patterns, finding structural echoes, seeing where one thing touched another. They did not learn the Drevhari language because there was no human framework for it yet, but they learned one thing with certainty. The signal the Drevhari had sent was not a copy of Sira's music. It shared the architecture, the underlying shape, but it had been transformed, changed at the level of what the music meant, not just how it sounded, which meant that something on the other side of that formation had understood on some level that the music had meaning, and had answered with its own. This was not peace. Rael would have been the last person to call it that. There were years of careful, difficult work ahead, and more fighting would happen before any of it, because 200 years of war does not dissolve in 9 hours no matter what passes between the parties. He knew this and did not pretend otherwise when he filed his report to High Command 3 days later. The report was long. He detailed everything: Das's analysis, the behavioral theory, the engagement, the signal. He recommended that future contact attempts be staffed by people who had experienced loss, because grief makes a person specific in ways that no professional training can replicate, and specificity, as Das had written, is the one thing that cannot be absorbed. He recommended that future engagements begin not with weapons but with transmission. He recommended that the coalition stop treating the Drevhari as a force of nature to be survived, and start treating them as something that might be understood. At the end of the report, in a section he labeled simply "Credit," He wrote that the mission's intellectual foundation had been the work of Das Carroll, and that Das Carroll should be recognized accordingly. He submitted the report and went to his quarters. Sierra found him there an hour later. She had a cup of something hot, real tea, from somewhere in the ship's supplies she had not mentioned before, and she handed it to him and sat down across from him. "Do you think they know about him?" she asked. "The Drevhari, do you think they understood when you talked about Das?" "I don't know," he said. "I think something landed. I don't know what shape it took on the other side." She nodded. She looked out the small viewport above his desk, where the stars were doing what stars always do, staying exactly where they are. "He would have written the whole thing down," she said. "Every second of it, he would have filled the notebook." "I know," Rail said. "We should finish it for him. Keep a record, someone should." Rail looked at her. She was already thinking about how to do it, turning it into something practical, which was how she processed things. "Yes," he said, "someone should." He drank the tea. It was bitter and it was real, and outside the viewport the stars held their positions without comment, as they had always done, entirely indifferent to what the small creatures living between them chose to do with the time they had. The ardent sorrow stayed in the corridor for another 6 days. Nothing attacked them. That was something. That was, in fact, everything.